It is the first visit to Britain by the Catholic Pope since 1982, and it comes shadowed by the child abuse scandal and some say outdated views on crucial issues. As the UK becomes an increasingly secular society, what is the need for this visit, costing the British taxpayer $18 million? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. Pope Benedict XVI has begun a 4-day visit to Britain, taking in an official reception with the Queen in Edinburgh and masses in Glasgow, in London and in Birmingham. The last time the Pope came was back in 1982. Pope John Paul II's 6-day tour then drew huge crowds. But times and events have changed, as Barbara Serra now reports.
Queen Elizabeth II welcoming the Pope at the start of his trip to the UK. She is the official host of this state visit, a visit which has proved controversial before it even began. But there was no sign of controversy here. The Queen and the Pope are both heads of state as well as leaders of their respective faiths, and religion played a key part in both their speeches.
Religion has always been a crucial element in national identity and historical self-consciousness. This has made the relationship between the different faiths a fundamental factor in the necessary cooperation within and between nation-states. It is, therefore, vital to encourage a greater mutual and respectful understanding.
Although this trip is bound to be overshadowed by the child abuse scandal, the Pope used his first address in the UK to warn about what he called aggressive forms of secularism.
As we reflect on the sobering lessons of the atheist extremism of the 20th century, let us never forget how the exclusion of God, religion, and virtue from public life leads ultimately to a truncated vision of man and of society, and thus to a reductive vision of the person and his destiny.
The first test of this visit came when the Pope met the crowds. In spite of reports of a lack of interest, the streets of Edinburgh were lined with thousands of people. The Pontiff greeted them from inside the safety of the familiar Pope-mobile. There were some protesters in the crowd too, and the Pope can expect to see and hear many more dissenting voices for the duration of his trip. Barbara Serra, Al Jazeera.
Well, joining us now to take this on are our guests at Bella Houston Park in Glasgow. Riazat Butt is there covering the visit as the religious affairs correspondent of the British newspaper The Guardian. You can hear the choir still ongoing after the arrival of the Pope. In London, Anna Arco, she's a reporter at the Catholic newspaper The Catholic Herald. And also joining us from the capital, Michael Campbell, editor of Young Freethought. That's a group supporting the Protest the Pope movement. Welcome to you all to this programme on this important day in the United Kingdom. Riazat Butt, I'd like to start with you, please. In Scotland, there's a whole gamut of emotions about this visit, isn't there? From excitement to indifference to hostility, indeed. How are these kind of myriad views of the Pope, religion in general, and recent scandals going to frame this trip, do you believe?
I think the headlines that we've seen over the last couple of weeks don't really matter at this event. When I've been speaking to people this morning, they're just very excited to be here. They're very optimistic. They're absolutely delighted with the Pope and the fact that he's coming to Scotland. And for a lot of people, it's a very happy occasion. So there seems to be a huge disconnect between the controversy in the newspapers and what's actually happening on the ground.
OK, Anna Arco, if we could come to you. There's several factors here, aren't there? Changing times in Britain in religious terms, a Pope with a poor public image, you know, the child abuse scandal and so on and so forth. It's going to be a tough trip for him, isn't it?
Yes, it's certainly going to have its challenges, and I think that we can see from the speech that he made this morning that he is going to rise to those challenges.
OK, well, in what way do you think he's going to rise to those challenges? Because it's easy to say things, isn't it? But people expect more than just words, don't they?
Yes, of course. But I mean, I think that, for instance, you speak of the sex abuse scandals. On the papal plane this morning, the Pope spoke incredibly frankly about the Church's lack of quick and decisive action in order to prevent the abuse scandals. He also said that the all of it had come as a terrible shock, and he couldn't really understand how priests could do such things. And I think that's a really sort of immediate reaction. I think that's very honest on his part, and I think that today his speech, he was addressing the role of religion in the public sphere, and he will continue to do so. I think that's his big message in the state part of his visit during this time.
Okay, Anna, well, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of all the issues that are facing the Pope on this trip. But Michael Campbell, if I could come to you from the Protest the Pope movement. It's easy to talk about protest, but the fact is there will be thousands and thousands of people in support of the Pope. We've seen them already out in the streets listening to what he's got to say.
Yes, that's true. It's unfortunate, I believe, because I think the man is a criminal. He's been both institutionally and personally responsible for the cover-up of child rape. Throughout his time in 1981, when he was appointed as the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, all child abuse cases have gone through his desk, and repeatedly throughout that time we've seen time and time again his signature on documents that do not recommend the removal of convicted paedophile priests, that prevent the defrocking of them. And since then, in 2001, when Ratzinger, the Pope, did send a letter to all cardinals, he once again recommended silence. In 2008, oh, sorry, not in 2008. This year, his letter to the flock in Ireland, again, like his statement today, was all words. He says that they didn't act quickly and decisively enough. Well, some quick and decisive action is what we need. What needs to happen is he needs to hand over the documents relating to all abuse cases to the secular authorities. They need to investigate these cases, and until that happens, then this scandal will continue to roll on.
I can see Anna Arco is just champing at the bit to get in there, so go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Michael, I'm afraid I'm going to have to contradict you there. Ratzinger, as the head of the CDF in 1982, was in charge of dealing with requests for the removal from the clerical state, and it's only in 2001 that he managed, because he was at the forefront really in the church for dealing with abuse, he in 2001 managed to get the cases, the allegations, known abuse allegations, to be brought to him directly in his department, and it's because at the time, you see, nobody in the Vatican was taking any responsibility, so it was falling through the cracks. It went from one department to another. So in 2001, he gets all the allegations sent through the CDF. Now, the other thing I'd like to correct you on, Michael, is the 2001 letter that you were talking about. He actually repeatedly told church officials to deal with secular authorities openly and within the law, as was required by secular authorities in those countries. It is actually true, I'm sorry. And well,
the letters are available for anyone to read.
Yes, they are. They're absolutely, it's all out there, Michael, and you can read it. It's the pontifical secrecy, which actually applies to the canonical trial and not to secular documents or the allegations themselves.
Anna, can I just jump in there and just ask you, do you think it's right that all the documents relating to these scandals should be handed over to the secular authorities?
I think that in the countries where secular authorities have laws, these documents should be given to secular authorities. In fact, Benedict himself has allowed for, when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, still head of the prefect of the Congregation of Faith, the statutes of limitation to be waived, that is, secular statutes of limitation, in order for priests to be prosecuted.
Okay, let me bring in Riyazat, forgive me, Riyazat Butt, the Guardian religious affairs correspondent. The bottom line is, with all this going on, is that you know, there's such indignation about this issue that it really is a very big problem for the Pope, isn't it?
It is a huge problem, and it's not just about the secret files that the Vatican has or that bishops have around the world. It's the public statements that some Vatican officials have made about the paedophile crisis. For example, one bishop blamed it on the Jews. Somebody else said there was a connection between paedophilia and homosexuality. And these kind of statements do nothing for the Vatican's reputation. It does nothing for their image. And they seem to be operating in a vacuum where they think they can make these kind of statements and not expect any kind of retribution or reproach. The Vatican is a very old institution, and it's rather like trying to turn around an ocean liner. It takes absolutely ages. So they cannot move at the pace of secular organisations. This is the way they behave. It could take another decade for any significant changes to be made in the way that clerical sexual abuse cases are handled.
Okay, Anna Arco, feeling that the church is a law unto itself and really cannot and should not police itself.
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just taking on Riyazat's point of view there, that the feeling that the church, the Catholic Church, is a law unto itself and cannot and should not indeed police itself.
Well, I think we're talking about two different things. On one hand, we're talking about secular law, and I think that I think that most Catholics would agree people who commit crimes against children of that sort should be prosecuted both by the secular and the church authorities, ecclesiastical authorities. I think that, you know, you have two distinct things. You've got punishment within the church, and then punishment which is you know organised by law. Now, the church polices itself in as far as its laws are concerned, and I think that as far as that's concerned, sorry, I'm not making much sense.
No,
basically, we
get the picture. We totally get the picture. We absolutely get the picture.
Yeah,
I'll tell you what we'll do now is we'll look at some of the issues, some of those dissenting voices that have drawn so much attention. For a start, some object to the state paying for a visit which cost the taxpayer $18 million. Others oppose it on ideological grounds. They say the Vatican has outdated views on several questions like abortion, stem cell research, contraception, all those frowned upon. Gay marriages and adoption by homosexual couples, not possible. Women cannot be ordained to the priesthood, and priestly celibacy is a must. And then, of course, there's everything that we've been discussing, the child sex abuse scandal that's rocked the Catholic Church. Many unhappy with the Pope himself, some, as we've heard, more extreme opponents even calling for his arrest over the issue. Riyazat, if I can come to you, the Catholic Church in Scotland had hoped to attract, you know, around about 100,000 people to the events there. 65,000 people in the end was the reduced amount, thousands of unfilled places in Hyde Park and Birmingham. What do you think that says about the state of religion in the United Kingdom, not just the Catholic Church, but religion in general, or the Christian religion in general? And what about those diminished numbers?
Well, I think in the case of the numbers, I think that Benedict would probably like to see 50,000 full-fat Catholics attending the Mass rather than 100,000 of the diet variety. For him, it's about the sincerity of belief and conviction. So I don't think the organisers are unduly worried, perhaps, that they might not get 100,000 people. They've made various excuses, if you like, saying that they would rather have people comfortable for 6 or 7 hours rather than trying to squeeze them in like a can of sardines. So that's the first thing on the numbers front. In terms of religion in the UK, that's really interesting because it's much more acceptable to question religion, to question religious belief. Religious leaders don't have that privilege of being protected from scrutiny anymore. They're much like politicians, in fact, and people are more prepared to go out of their way and be hostile even to religious leaders. And that's not something that would have happened 10 or 15 years ago. A lot has been made of the secularisation of Britain, and I think it's not so much that Britain is becoming more secular, it's just that it's more acceptable to be secular. Maybe 10 or 15 years ago you wouldn't have admitted to being an atheist, but now it's actually perfectly commonplace to do that.
Okay, Riza, I have to say you're doing incredibly well with that background of singing in the background.
I'm having to compete with a choir.
I know, you're doing incredibly well. We do appreciate it, and I hope our viewers can hear all right. Michael Campbell, what's your response to that? It's certainly a sign of changing times in the United Kingdom, isn't it?
Yes, I think Ms. Butt's largely correct. The times are changing, but I would like to make sure that we understand that this issue isn't necessarily one to do with atheism versus religion, or the recent books that have been coming out to do with that debate. This is about secularism. This is also about justice. To go back to the point you raised at the beginning about the fact that this is a state visit, the Pope really had two options. He could have done a pastoral visit like Pope John Paul II did, which of course we wouldn't be objecting to so much. But as a state visit, he really has no right to be here. Both because of the nature of the views he holds and the acts he's performed over the years in his time in the church, but also because there's a very convincing case being made, especially by Jeffrey Robertson, in a book he's just published, that the Vatican itself is not actually a state. It's a pseudo-state created by Mussolini in the late 20s. The Vatican in the UN fulfills none of the obligations it's meant to. The Commission report on the Rights of the Child, for example, they're 13 years behind on filling that report in. So in many ways, both technically and morally, as on a state visit, the Pope shouldn't be here.
Anna Arco, I think I've just seen the definition of perplexed look in your expression.
Well, Nick and Michael, the thing is, both former Prime Minister Gordon Brown and David Cameron and the Queen have all invited the Pope. He's accepted their invitation. So from that basic point of view, it is a state visit, not one that the Pope could have made a pastoral visit, yes, but he was invited, so he came as part of a state visit. It's a very historic moment for Catholics in this country, because I think it shows that finally the Catholics are an accepted part of society. They're no longer a bunch of Irish immigrants who are basically looked down upon. I think that's a really great and important step. As to the point you were making about the Vatican not being a state, it's very interesting. I think, again, Michael, we have to make a distinction. The Holy See and the Vatican city-state are two very different things. Now, the Holy See has had a sovereign identity for hundreds and hundreds of years, and the Vatican city-state it was in fact created, as you say, by the Lateran Treaty in 1929. But Britain's first ambassador to the Holy See was around in the 1500s. So I think that as a sovereign entity, the Holy See has been active for centuries.
Michael Campbell?
Well, do you think they should fulfil their obligations to the UN and finish reports and file in reports that they're meant to if they do want to be considered a state?
I have no objection to that.
Okay, I'll tell you what. Let me bring in. Let's take on that choir in Scotland again. See how it's doing, and bring in Riazat. There was a cardinal, wasn't there, who said arriving at Heathrow is like arriving at a third world country, and he's not now here because apparently he's ill, so he hasn't come. But he also described Britain as having a new and aggressive atheism. Do you think that's true?
Again, I go back to my earlier point that I don't think it's a new aggressive atheism. I just think atheism has found its voice in the same way that religion had a voice, and I use the past tense here. Religion had a voice, it had a confidence, it had a presence in the public sphere. Now I think the atheists and the secularist groups and the humanist groups have found an equal footing. They are very organised, they're very motivated, they have a very clear message, and they know what their aims are. What they want to do is they want to challenge the religious privilege, or they want to challenge the privilege of religion in British society. They're saying that you can't just say that you have the monopoly on morals in life. Atheists have morals too, secularists have morals too, and they're demanding, I think it's a very interesting state of affairs, and I have to say that I personally felt very offended by what the Cardinal had to say about Britain. I think that multiculturalism does have its weaknesses, but I actually think it's one of Britain's greatest strengths as well, and I did think that he was unwise to make those remarks, and then the Vatican to try and spin it into something positive. Well, I'm really sorry, but nobody's ever used the phrase third world country in a positive way before. I'm sorry, the choir started again. So
no, we can hear you. We can hear you. But Anna Arco, okay, well done. Anna, I want to get your response from that.
Well, as to the Cardinal, I'm afraid I was trying to understand what he was trying to say, and it doesn't really, there's just no way it makes any sense or comes out in a good way. So
okay, all right. Well, we appreciate your position on that then. But let me just bring up something else, because we're running out of time. There's a lot of issues to get through.
Sure.
We've only got 3 or 4 minutes. What about the other questions, like abortion, like stem cell research, like the use of condoms? I mean, many people say that the Catholic Church's approach is kind of archaic and even dangerous, especially when it talks about the no condom policy in relation to AIDS and so forth. Isn't it time for the Catholic Church to get into the 21st century?
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because the most sociologists and people who are involved these days in the battle against AIDS in Africa, where the epidemic is so great, would argue, I think, would agree that condoms alone don't solve the problem. If you look at the most recent UN AIDS reports, they show that the countries where behavioural change has taken place are the ones which are most effective in fighting AIDS. Now, with the Church, if people are not sort of listening to what the Church has to say about other things, it's very difficult to expect them to listen to what the Church has to say about contraception in general.
Absolutely. Michael Campbell, I'd like to put that to you. I mean, there's no reason why we shouldn't at least be in dialogue with the Catholic Church and with the head of the Catholic Church about these crucially important issues and the various angles that you can get on it.
Of course, but it seems that Ratzinger's the one who doesn't want the dialogue, because he, of course, is absolutely right. He's the Pope. The issue here isn't so much that he prevents the use of condoms, is that he lies, and in 2008 said condoms actually exacerbate the problem. Now, that's just not true. Of course, if you fly over a developing country and throw down a box of condoms off a helicopter, you're not going to solve the problem. But don't lie and say that condoms exacerbate the problem. Talk about abstinence, talk about being faithful to your partner, try and change behaviours, but don't lie about condom use. It works, it's just a fact.
Anna?
Michael, I think you're taking the Pope's quote out of context. When he was saying that he wasn't saying that condoms in intercourse don't stop the spread of AIDS. What he was saying was that it was irresponsible to do precisely what you were just saying before, which is to just give out condoms on a massive scale. And I think he has a point.
He said they increase the problem. He said they exacerbate the problem. He didn't just say that they don't work either
well, they do,
physically
because they encourage reckless behaviour.
Okay, well, let's agree to disagree on that particular issue. I just want to bring in Riyazat back, because we are right at the end of the programme now. Bottom line is, can the Catholic Church survive all of this?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, for the Catholic Church, it's not about numbers, it's not about size. The Catholic Church is not going to change. They're just announcing Susan Boyle, so they're not going to change their position on condom use or abortion or homosexuality. But what they will find is that the gulf between them and the rest of society, as it becomes more liberal, will inevitably widen.
Okay, well, Riyazat, we do appreciate your efforts there. I think we've heard you loud and clear, despite all the noise in the background and the various events going on there, so we appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us, Riyazat, and also thank you, Anna Arca, and also Michael Campbell. Thanks very much indeed for your time on this important issue and an interesting discussion. Thanks a lot. And thanks for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions, of course. Just email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me, Nick Clark, it's goodbye.